It is one of the chilling wonders of this earth, the sheer scale of destruction, sometimes meted out in just a few seconds. Until today, in the heart of Italy, you could have been walking down this street, but within a few seconds, it looked like this. It was an earthquake that literally stopped the clock, and there are still some people buried here tonight.
Still a lot of people under the bricks. It's very difficult to get to because they're old buildings, everything just folded like a cart house.
Also on News at 10. The death toll mounts. More people are swept out to sea while swimming off a beach in the UK, this time at Camber Sands. Turkey invades Syria. Since the Iraqis also advance on Mosul, are we approaching the endgame for so-called Islamic State? There may be life as we know it on a newly discovered planet. The bad news, it's 25 trillion miles away. And the pilot bizarrely seems to try and assist an emergency crash landing. But is Airlander ever really going to fly? And what is the point of it?
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. When the sun set on the hills northeast of Rome last night, the town of Amatrice was one of the secluded jewels of that beautiful landscape. By sunrise this morning, much of it lay in ruins, reduced to rubble by a powerful earthquake in the early hours. Across the affected zone, at least 120 have been killed. But the brutal truth is that many more bodies are likely to be found in the days ahead, since many people are still officially missing. This is Amatrice tonight, and of course the search goes on. There have been some rescues, too few, but the work has continued as tremors, 60 of them in all, have repeatedly shaken the area. Now this was, as you can see, a picturesque and historic tourist town. This, the town square, barely recognisable just a few hours later. The earthquake measured 6.2 in magnitude, and the actual epicentre was in Accumoli, just down the road from Amatrice and about 65 miles from the capital, Rome. The tremors were also felt there.
As the light faded on Amatrice tonight, it appeared that optimism was waning too. Body bags now positioned on the stretchers, which for much of the day had gone in with blankets. It's 18 hours now since the quake struck, the clock tower capturing the moment when, in the early hours, life here stopped for some and changed for many. There were so many dead that for hours today, the bodies could only be gathered and left on the ground. This time yesterday, these buildings were busy family homes. Tonight, they're in ruins, as is most of this town. Beneath the rubble, many of those who lived here, some still alive, many others lost. On the few walls still standing, the reminders of how normal life can go so dreadfully wrong. The clock with nothing left to rest on, the keys in the door which now leads nowhere, the abandoned sofa and chair. There is now a huge rescue and recovery operation underway. Local people and those trained in this challenging business working together.
It's rather bad. It's not much left of the city. There's a lot of buildings collapsed. There probably is going to be still a lot of people under the bricks. It's very difficult to get to because they're old buildings. Everything just folded like a cart house. It collapsed. There are people, unfortunately, deceased people that we had to take out.
Some survivors have been found. This man pulled to safety exactly 12 hours after being encased in his home.
What strikes you most of all as soon as you arrive on this street is how close the line is between life and death. Rooms where people would have stood a chance of surviving, so close to rooms where they would have stood no chance at all.
Those who were able to get out in time have today been trying to recover a few items from their homes. A sorry stream of small bags and cases being hauled away past the rescue workers who have descended on this mountain too. I thank God I survived, this man says. There were so many young people here. It's holiday season and the town fair is the day after tomorrow. so many people had come for that. It was a similar picture of devastation in the Umbrian town of Akumali. Several hours after the last aftershocks, rescue teams were still searching for families missing beneath the rubble. From the air, it's possible to trace the route of the tremor and pick out the dreadful damage it has done. Tonight, this area is in darkness as the power is gone. Italians know their country stands on a fault line, but knowledge does not ease their shock and grief. Emma Murphy, News at 10, Amatrice.
It is probably not something any of us considers much, but there is in fact a constant threat from earthquakes in Italy. It is a country carved up by fault lines, making it, believe it or not, one of the most earthquake-prone nations in the world, hit by tremors almost every single day. There are in fact two major faults, one running from north to south, the other straight across the country, dividing Rome from Naples. As you can see, this quake, like many others in Italy, hit at a shallow depth, just 4 kilometres underground, increasing its severity. 6 years ago, an earthquake of a similar size hit the city of L'Aquila, killing more than 300 people. The most deadly of modern times was in 1980, slightly further south. It was 6.9 in magnitude and killed close to 2,500 people. Emma Murphy joins us now. Emma, as you perhaps heard there, we were just describing how Italians, of course, are no strangers to earthquakes. But tonight, I'm imagining they're still very much hopeful they will pull people out alive tomorrow.
Yes, there is a real hope that the search and rescue effort will continue overnight. It will do in some limited form, but obviously there are real problems here because there's no power, so there's no real good light to work with. The hope is that the 100 or so people that are still thought to be missing in this area, some at least might be brought out alive, but you know, people are realistic about what happens as time passes. When we were waiting this afternoon outside one of the houses, relatives were asked to call the mobile telephone of one of those who was missing, and the phone rang and rang and rang, and it was absolutely awful to wait and hear it keep ringing. We this afternoon saw that actually 2 bodies were recovered from that house. So it is a situation that does have some moments of joy because sometimes people are brought out, but actually there are a lot of bodies being brought out this evening.
Okay, Emma, they are heartbreaking, these stories, but thank you very much for now. Now, back here, the distressing spate of holiday drownings around Britain's coastline continued today, with 3 more lives lost, this time at Camber Sands near Rye in East Sussex. The men got into difficulties in what appeared to be calm waters, not like the storms of last weekend.
On the hottest day of the year and on a beach packed with people, emergency teams were desperately trying to save the lives of 3 swimmers after being pulled out of the water. Despite their efforts, all 3 died.
We saw 2 people receiving CPR, and then about 10 minutes later we saw 1 more person come along, and then they were receiving CPR as well, and they put the windbreakers up around them to obviously stop other people from seeing what was going on.
It was very upsetting for all the kids and what have you.
Camber Sands is one of Britain's most beautiful beaches. Flagged either side by shingle beaches, people flock here, especially in hot weather. Although the water is shallow, the currents are strong. Just last month, another swimmer got into trouble in the water and died. The police were carrying out beach patrols today, but people say more should be done.
You can see there's literally no one. So they need more precautions here, more safety guard, and people just patrolling, because police only came when they heard the news of 3 people drowning,
But despite the dangers, and even with today's tragic events, people were still swimming, drawn by this sandy stretch.
Now, if that wasn't bad enough, as we speak, there is another ongoing operation down on the beach at Camber Sands tonight. And since Sejal sent that report, more bodies have been found, or so we understand. Sejal, what is going on?
Yes, Tom, the RNLI have confirmed to us tonight that 2 more bodies have been recovered on the beach here at Camber Sands, and a search is underway for a 3rd person that is still missing. That brings the total number of deaths here on one day alone to 5, with a 6th person missing. As you can probably see behind me, there is a major incident underway. There are several ambulances, there's a fire crew, there's an incident support unit, the Coast Guard, the police. I've heard helicopters circling above, and I've also seen search teams down on the beach with torches looking for that person, and clearly it's very, very dark here. So again, another major incident here in Camber Sands tonight to look for that 3rd person missing.
A horrific end to the day. So Jill, thank you for now. A serving Royal Marine who comes originally from Northern Ireland is being questioned by detectives on suspicion of preparing for acts of terrorism there. Kieran Maxwell was arrested in a pre-planned operation in Somerset, where he lives. Now, separate searches have been made in Larne in Northern Ireland, close to where 2 large Republican arms dumps were discovered in March. Both contenders for the Labour leadership found out just how hard it can sometimes be to get across a chosen campaign message today. Jeremy Corbyn ended up having to talk about his failure to find a seat on that train rather than the NHS. For Owen Smith, it was his reference to a lunatic at the top of the Labour Party and not his chosen topic, Brexit. Mr Corbyn insisted again there were no spare seats, at least not 2 together, on that train. Mr Smith promised that the lunatic he was referring to was, in fact, himself, not Jeremy Corbyn. So that's all clear then.
It's exactly a month until the winner of the Labour leadership contest is due to be announced. But day to day, both candidates seem to be finding it difficult to get their main messages across. It was easy to find a spare seat at Jeremy Corbyn's press conference today. The row over whether he had to sit on the floor on a train or not chugs on, much to his irritation.
Well, no, can we move on, please? It's discussing the NHS today. We're discussing the NHS. Can you have an NHS question, please? Yes, I did walk through the train. Yes, I did look for 2 empty seats together so I could sit down with my wife to talk to her. That wasn't possible.
The Information Commissioner is now looking at this footage released by Virgin Trains on Richard Branson's Twitter account as a possible breach of data protection laws. It appears to show Jeremy Corbyn walking past available seats before he was filmed sitting on the floor to highlight his campaign to renationalise the railways. So Jeremy Corbyn versus Virgin boss Richard Branson, 2 men with little in common other than a beard and very different views on how to run the railways.
Well, I'm very pleased that Richard Branson has been able to break off from his holiday to take this issue seriously with the importance it obviously deserves. I hope he's very well aware of our policy, which is that train operating companies should become part of the public realm, not the private sector.
Owen Smith's attempt to unseat Jeremy Corbyn also veered off the rails after he appeared to suggest during a campaign event that Jeremy Corbyn was a, quote, lunatic.
And what you won't do from me is some, lunatic at the top of the Labour Party.
I didn't use that language with reference to Jeremy. I used it with reference to myself. Somebody said I've been running around like a lunatic. If anybody's been offended by that, I apologise unreservedly.
Bitter and bad-tempered already describe this campaign, so a row over trains and who called who what only add to the froth and the fury as the fight continues between the 2 men over who will occupy the leader's seat on the Labour benches in the place behind me. The chatter around the campaign can drown out policy debate, but it can also solidify support. Owen Smith's language, colourful, regretful, but understood by those who doubt Jeremy Corbyn's competence. And for those happy to clap along with Corbyn, like his supporters at an event in Essex tonight, bashing a billionaire railway tycoon for attempting to derail his campaign will only be celebrated. Angus Walker, News at 10, Westminster.
After a string of attacks on its territory blamed on so-called Islamic State, Turkey acted today with a significant show of military force rolling its tanks over the border and into Syria. President Erdogan has promised to cleanse the area around the Syrian border of IS militants after the weekend bombing of a wedding in Gaziantep. But Turkey is also growing, increasingly concerned that Kurdish forces in northern Syria may take advantage of the vacuum left behind. Turkey, of course, has long feared that its own Kurdish minority might attempt to help carve out an independent state. In any event, today's advance into Syria was designed to push Islamic State out of the town of Jarablus. It is a significant change in the military balance of the region and a sign that pressure is being applied now to so-called IS from all sides.
A line was crossed in Syria this morning. A squadron of Turkish tanks made its way over the border. Artillery batteries inside Turkey were shelling the area around the town of Jarablus, preparing the way for the tanks and Turkish-backed Syrian rebel fighters sent in to drive out the extremists. It's time to put an end to the problems on our border, said Turkey's President Erdogan. Whoever poses a terror threat to Turkey, he said, will find this nation standing against them. The Islamic State group is thought to have been behind a series of terrorist attacks in Turkey, most recently at the weekend when more than 50 people were killed in a suicide bombing at a wedding. American drones based in Turkey provided surveillance for this morning's operation, and US warplanes carried out airstrikes in support of the ground offensive. The United States and Turkey are fighting a common enemy in Syria, the so-called Islamic State. But part of the reason for this morning's incursion was to take on Kurdish fighters, who Turkey feels threatened by and who enjoy American support in the Syrian war. The US-Turkey alliance goes back decades, but rarely has it been as difficult and as delicately poised as it is right now. Turkey is still a country in trauma following last month's attempted coup by elements within its military. And the Turkish government is angry that America has not yet extradited the man it holds responsible for the plot. This afternoon, the American vice president was in Ankara to smooth things over, and he saw the damage caused by the coup plotters in the parliament building.
This is devastating. Can you imagine if this happened at home? Can you imagine what the American public would be saying?
Mr. Biden also gave assurances that the US would rein in its Kurdish allies over the border in Syria, where by this evening Turkish-backed fighters were posting videos of themselves on the outskirts of Jarablus. There is still no sign of a peaceful resolution to Syria's war, and its uncanny ability to draw others in is as strong as ever. Geraint Vincent, News at 10. Istanbul.
Well, Turkey's attack against IS on their Syrian border is just the latest setback for the militants. Al-Rai and Manbij have both been lost to US-backed rebels in recent weeks. Meanwhile, in Iraq, after retaking the city of Fallujah, government forces are now pushing north towards Mosul, recapturing the important Karaya airfield that could be used in any missions to retake Iraq's second city, while Kurdish forces advance from the east. Now, in Australia's Queensland coast, far away from Iraq, let alone the UK, it seems that any threat of terrorism is most unlikely. But a British woman backpacking around the country has been stabbed to death in a hostel by a man shouting "God is great" in Arabic. Queensland police, investigating the death of Mia Alif Chung from Derbyshire, say terrorism is just one of the motives they are looking into. A 30-year-old British man who, it seems, tried to come to Mia's rescue was also stabbed and is critically ill.
She was, say friends, a free spirit who was living her dream to travel the world. But last night, Mia Alif Chung was stabbed to death just days into the latest leg of her year-long adventure. Tonight, back in Derbyshire, her mother's partner told me she possessed rare qualities.
Rose's beloved daughter Mia was an amazing young woman with an adventurous spirit. Not only was she kind and funny, she was clever, sassy, with a sense of fun. Mia was full of the kind of open-minded compassion for life that you don't see that often.
Mia was killed at a popular hostel for fruit pickers in Queensland in front of 30 other backpackers. Police say they're looking at a number of possible motives for the attack, including terrorism.
Initial inquiries indicate that comments may be construed of an extremist nature were made by the alleged offender. It is alleged that the suspect used the phrase Allah Akbar during the attack and when arrested by police.
A British man, Tom Jackson, was also critically injured after reportedly trying to save Mia. Australian police say the alleged attacker was on a temporary visa and they're investigating whether mental health or drugs problems were involved. Just days before her death, Mia had posted on social media tales from her trip about the wildlife and her tan. Her family say she died living life to the full. Ben Chapman, News at 10, Derbyshire.
It is a very uncomfortable concept, coffin congestion, but that is the phrase being used outside cemeteries in the Philippines at the moment. The back-to-back funerals are the direct result of President Duterte's decision to openly encourage pretty much anyone and everyone to murder drug dealers and even users at will. If you've been watching News at 10 this week, you'll know exactly what I mean. Tonight, in the latest in her remarkable series, Debbie Edward talks to the families left behind.
A distraught wife cries out for her dead husband. Another victim of the war on drugs that is consuming the Philippines. At the North Cemetery in Manila, the coffins just keep coming, laying bare the toll of President Duterte's crackdown on crime. Queues of hearses now create traffic jams at the cemetery gates. 9-year-old Rosa's grief comes in waves. She stares at her father's coffin as her mother tells me how he died. He was killed in a police drugs raid last week, she says, rounded up with other suspected users and shot against a wall. Since his death last week, the family have been holding vigil, trying to raise enough money to have him buried. She appealed to President Duterte to stop the killing. Even drug addicts have a right to change, she said. Don't order them to be killed, put them in jail. Families are suffering because of the killings you are ordering. In parts of Manila, 92% of crime is drug-related, and across the rest of the country, addiction is singled out as the root cause of rising unemployment, poverty and corruption. It was his promise of extreme measures that elevated Rodrigo Duterte to the position of president. And at this jobs market for merchant seamen, we found Duterte voters undeterred by the country's rising body count.
There are many addicts and some bad guys, and we are not safe on the road. So some of the people who get killed every day by those bad people. And now bad people seem scared because of President Duterte. So maybe it's a good thing.
The votes of 60 million people gave the new Philippines leader permission to act with impunity.
The president promised the Filipino people that this would be a 6-month campaign on drugs. But what if Duterte's war is not won by then? When does the bloodletting stop?
There have been almost 2,000 deaths so far, and there will surely be thousands more before the president is deemed to have delivered on his pledge of a better life. Debbie Edward, News at 10, Manila.
And if you did miss Debbie's earlier reports, do head over to our website and take a look. They are compelling and frankly extraordinary, particularly the dispatch from a Manila prison last night. No, it's not something any of us alive today is ever going to have to worry about. At least, let's sincerely hope we don't. But what does happen when the sun eventually goes out? One answer could be that everyone would then have to move to another planet. And guess what? Scientists have found a potential solution. The slight problem is that it's 25 trillion miles away. That's not very far in space terms as it happens, but it would still take a not inconsiderable 80,000 years to get there.
It is a remarkable discovery, the closest known potentially habitable planet to Earth, orbiting Proxima Centauri, the nearest star to the Sun, 25 trillion miles away. It is the breakthrough of a lifetime for these researchers at the European Southern Observatory.
We have found a terrestrial planet orbiting Proxima Centauri. It's the nearest exoplanet we will ever find because it's the nearest star to the Sun, and we are very excited about it.
They found this faraway world with the help of a huge observatory in the Chilean Atacama Desert with a special reflector telescope. The planet is in a habitable zone, the area around a star where water can remain liquid on a planet's surface. Experts call it the Goldilocks zone because the temperature needs to be just right. If a planet orbits too close to its star, it risks a runaway greenhouse gas effect like Venus. But if it's too far away, any surface water will freeze like Mars. Its surface is rocky like Earth. If it also has water, the next big question, is there life?
It's quite an encouraging prospect for the existence of very simple, single-celled life, sort of slime, not for the prospects of the sort of alien life that we might be able to communicate with.
More than 3,000 other extrasolar planets have been discovered in the last few years, but most of them are hundreds of light years away and almost impossible to research. Scientists can't see the planet even through the most powerful of telescopes. What they can do is measure the slightest movement of light, picking up on any changes. Research is already underway into a new generation of tiny nanoprobes with laser-driven sails, which could make the journey in just 20 years.
The sun isn't going to last forever and stars have fixed lifetime. And so we eventually will probably want to move to other parts of our own solar system or indeed beyond.
A manned mission to the planet is impossible with current technology. It would take 80,000 years, about as long as humans have existed on Earth. Nazneen Mashiri, News at 10, the George Abel Observatory.
It's fair to say it's going to take a bit of a technological leap to get us there. And finally, this time a week ago, we finished the programme with a long-awaited but successful maiden flight of the world's biggest aircraft, the Airlander, a hybrid of a plane and an airship. Well, of course, unfortunately, flight number 2 didn't go quite so well. The pilot or one of the crew appeared to assist in an incredibly unorthodox and frankly dangerous-looking crash landing. But whilst it was remarkable to look at, it does rather beg the question, what is the point of an Airlander? Duncan Golestani tries to provide an answer.
Nothing about the Airlander happens quickly. Not its development, not its maiden flight last week, and certainly not its first crash.
Oh my God, he's actually just broken it.
As if playing out in slow motion today, the Airlander nosedived into its airfield. Look carefully and you can see one of the pilots dangling from the cockpit, trying to steady the craft. Moments later, the ship appears to land on him, but there's relief from those watching when they see he's okay.
Those pilots are okay. There's movement in there.
Well, you wish for the best of all these things, but you know, something new and experimental like this, something bad's bound to happen eventually. But looking at it right now, it seems to be in one piece and still full of air, so that's a relief.
I think it's a shock, like how much money they've spent on it, and it's kind of crashed so soon.
What a come down from the fanfare of last week's maiden journey. Because the Airlander can stay up for 5 days straight, makers believe it could be used by the military for surveillance or even by tourists for trips to remote parts. But with today's setback, that could be a far-off prospect. Considering the cockpit's at the brunt of the landing, it is remarkable the 2 pilots escaped without serious injury. Tonight the Airlander is moored up in its usual position and it's stable. They just need to work out what went wrong. Add that to the hundreds of hours of test flights the Airlander still has to complete, and it's clear the journey ahead for this British innovation. Golestani, News at 10, Bedfordshire.
Well, it does look amazing, but maybe that's not the point. Let's just take a quick look at what might be happening tomorrow. We'll get the latest migration figures, which show how many more people arrived in Britain than left up to the end of June, so around the time of the vote to leave the EU. It's the main day for GCSE results. It'll be the last time that grades of A to G are awarded. Next summer, they will be numbered from 9 to 1 instead. And overnight in America, an interesting double act. Nigel Farage and Donald Trump on the same political stage together, talking apparently about Brexit. I'm sure we will be talking about that tomorrow. I will be here, same time, same place, but for now, good night, and thank you very much for watching.